Welcome back to the Care Advocates. I am your co-host, Lance A. Slatton, as always joined by my esteemed colleague and friend, Dr. George Ackerman, also known better as Sharon's son, George. Today we have a special guest joining us, Dr. Pearl L. Harmon. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Is it okay to call you Pearl?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Pearl, we're going to get to learn a lot about you and the tremendous work you're doing, but I want to give George a second to introduce him and tell a little bit about his background for our new viewers and listeners.
I want to thank you, Lance, for all the work you do behind the scenes, and of course our team become almost like brothers, and want to welcome our incredible guest. My background is, of course, lost my mother unfortunately due to Parkinson's disease, and I don't know if it's our advocacy, but things are kind of taking off. I'm just finally on TV recently. We're heading back to Washington, D.C. in a week or two with the Michael J. Fox Foundation to advocate to our representatives throughout the country how important it is to fund NIH research towards a cure for all diseases. But it's always, again, an honor because this show concentrates a lot more on the caregiver side. And ironically, I've spent like probably 24/7 talking about Parkinson's and my mother, and I literally don't talk about caregiving at all. So that's why the show means the world to me. And again, an honor to be back with everyone listening. And we send our love to and support to everyone out there.
Thank you, George. Dr. Pearl, do you want to just take a moment and give a brief introduction to yourself? And then George is going to kick it off with some questions for you.
Sure. So I am Dr. Pearl L. Harmon. I'm a caregiver strategist, leadership consultant, and a caregiver for the past 15 years, a former caregiver for 15 years. So for nearly about 30 years or so, I did serve in education as a leader, and now I really work at the intersection of caregiving, systems, and leadership. And all of that is a result of the 15 years that I spent caring for my mom and my dad as a long-distance caregiver, and then actually within the same state. So I try to build clarity and confidence with caregivers, but particularly focus now on organizations so that they can understand how caregiving really affects the stability of their workforce and, of course, the family well-being. So I'm thrilled to be here and to join this conversation today.
Yeah, well, we're glad to have you. George?
Well, we send our love and support to you and your whole family, and grateful to have you with us today. I had the honor to kind of selfishly know you already, and also had the honor to work with you on something that's very important called the Caregiver Advocates. We want to start off, obviously, maybe you could share a little bit about, your family journey and what they were battling, but also why did you feel it was so important, like myself, to join together with other caregivers across the world to be a part of this special book?
Absolutely. So as I briefly shared, I live in the state of Maryland, and my folks were living in New York at the time. And just over a series of months, I just started noticing something was a little bit different about my mom. And in conversation with my sister, we decided, we need to take a deeper look to see what's happening. So as a result of that, we ended up relocating them to Maryland, where we are. And the journey of caregiving began full-fledged. So while I was always navigating and supporting them while we were in different states, when they were actually here is when I really started noticing something. So I am a former educator, well, always a lifelong educator, but I was in the process of opening up a new school, and my mom was a principal. And so we've always had this share of responsibility and this share commitment to education. So we were both excited about me having the opportunity to open up a brand new school. And just through that process, she came with me. We were staying together for several months. And every single morning we would get up to go to school to prepare the building to open. And I once remember giving her a simple task. And the task was, can you just help number these books in the closet? Because there were thousands of boxes of books, as you can imagine. And when I went and checked in with her a few moments later, I noticed that there was some misnumbering. The numbers were not in sequence. And first, I just paused and said, not really sure what it was. But then in talking to her, I realized she wasn't aware that the numbers were not in sequence. So I literally walked out of that room, walked into my office, and I broke down in tears. Because I knew that something was wrong. I did not have a name for it at the time. And I started having flashbacks of previous conversations that we had, that she was either repeating herself or just things were just a little bit awry. And that's when it really hit me that the woman that I always looked up to, the one that we planned lessons, she was not really the same anymore. And I really didn't know what to do with that. So I pushed it aside and just kept working. So that was really the beginning of my journey of understanding that something was going on with mom. And I was later able to get a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And of course, that was just a total crush to me personally and to her. But at the same time, she really embraced the space with grace because she was just being who she was at that time, right? So all of that really felt on me trying to understand what was happening, how I can support her. So it was honestly through that process that really led to my 15-year journey with mom and then later on with dad that drove my love for I have to continue to do something to help caregivers because while I knew great systems, I knew how to put things in place, when I was actually living that journey, everything went awry and I was lost and I was confused. And so I decided to utilize my love and space of education to then give back to my caregiving community by just being a beacon and just being another voice to support caregivers as they go through the journey, whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or just any illness for that matter, or diseases for that matter with their loved ones.
Thanks for standing up and being a voice for so many. Really appreciate your work, and again, look forward to advocating together for many years to come. Want to send the show to Lance now.
Thank you, George. Pearl, first, thank you, for sharing that story with your mom. It's difficult when, we see a parent, a spouse, a loved one who's in crisis with their health, whether it's a diagnosis or an injury. And, you had that realization that something was wrong with mom. And then you get the diagnosis, and it ultimately was Alzheimer's. Did you have any medical or healthcare background, professionally speaking, prior to that diagnosis?
Absolutely not. No. I was a teacher, I was in education, but healthcare, no.
And the reason I'm asking that is so many, I would say 99% probably of family caregivers don't have that, medical background, right? And all of a sudden they're thrust into this role without warning sometimes and often really of being a caregiver. What were the first steps you did to educate yourself and find support? Where did you turn to first?
I turned to what I naturally knew. So again, as a former teacher, I knew that I had to do some research. I had to plan a lesson is how I looked at it. And me planning that lesson, meaning I had to start doing some research. And the research really wasn't even around Alzheimer's. It was around how do I organize medical appointments for someone else? How do I find out her history? Because we talked about it informally, but I had no idea her full history, her medical history, especially being from another state. So I literally spent lots of hours trying to understand her medical history, trying to understand and unpack financial situations, understanding how to even talk to a physician about someone else and not myself. So just the entire role of how do you support someone who is your parent, who is now in this crisis per se, and you have this full-time job, you have a full-time life that you're now trying to manage and balance with this piece. So that was really the beginning of me creating these lessons in my mind of how do I begin to support her. So that looked like me grabbing a huge binder and just started putting information in there.
Yeah. And, my story and so many others isn't far too different than yours. And one thing I noticed talking to all these people really around the world and even my own experience, we never said the doctors, the nurses, the hospital gave me this information. You had to go research it, make that plan, put that lesson together. And a good friend of mine, Pearl, calls it diagnose and adios. You got the diagnosis and you're out the door, and then you're kind of left there figuring it out for yourself. And, sadly, I don't know how many years ago this was for your mother, but for mine, it was almost 20 years ago. And, my wife and I, we were newlyweds. I was pursuing medical school at the time. And my dad, it was not dementia. He had a severe fall and had to have an operation, and he was going to come live with us for a couple of weeks. The home health care nurse said, that's the option, or I can put him in the rehab for a couple of weeks because of the location and the severity of his wound. He's not able to properly manage it on his own because my parents were divorced and none of us here could either because of the location. But it ended up being 2.5 years and 7 major operations later. And so never once during that time period did anybody say to my wife or to myself or to my father, who is also a veteran, here's some resources, here's some support, here's some community, opportunities to help you guys during this transitional period. And that subsequently led us to starting our home care company, because I told my wife, I said, there's got to be other people out there like us who need the help like us, that aren't aware there's help out there like us. And so for us, it changed our entire lives. For you, you started your company, Aging Care Navigators. What made you, during that situation, taking your academic career, transitioning it into starting this, home health care, caregiving career? What was it about that?
It was because I received a lot of resources. So there was information just given to me. I did absolutely nothing with it because it was there. And because I was in the space of overwhelm and just confusion around, first, what is going on with mom? What does this diagnosis mean? I'm living and seeing that every day something is changing. So all the papers really didn't matter because I didn't have the bandwidth to even absorb any of it. So as a result of that, it was in probably 4 or 5 years into my caregiving journey is when I really started thinking, Pearl, what can you do? How can you help the next person? And so that's when I literally started thinking about, and the concept of Aging Care Navigators came about. It was because I received the information and I started internalizing it and then organizing it. And I said, if I'm a person who knows systems, who knows how to create any and everything to run an organization, run a company, why is this so difficult? And so I literally started planning in my mind, although I never put it on paper, of the next person that I meet, and people started having conversations with me and asked me questions. And then I realized this is just not happening to Pearl, it's happening to thousands of others. And so that was really the birth of Aging Care Navigator. Me sharing what I knew, me really listening to individuals and having them realize that they were not alone in the space, in the journeys. And so it began. I really utilized my lived experience to create an organization that would be able to support the next caregivers. And then because I was in a large organization working in human resources for a while, I started thinking more broadly. Is this organization that I'm in, or are organizations really set up to understand individuals who are caregivers for adults? Because I try to make the distinction between the caregivers for children, because we naturally take care of parents when they have kids. Every organization knows how to put things in place to support those parents. But when another adult says, I need to go off and take care of mom, there's usually a pause. There's usually this look of wondering, and I think not so much of an understanding and support that comes along to that. So,
No, I agree absolutely. And before I give it back to George, you excuse me, you have a great topic that you talk about, and that's caregiving is a workforce issue. We're still calling it a personal problem, and you just kind of touched on it. Do you see that changing? And if you have, how have you seen it change?
I'm beginning to hear more conversations and see more written texts and around that. I think it's probably, well, I know for sure, as a result of COVID, everything shut down and work life changed. And so you had more and more people actually stepping out of the workforce. Even in my space, I realized that individuals were actually transitioning out of the workplace because they were now being responsible for their mom, their dad, their grandparent. And so when we think about that from an organization standpoint, you're releasing talent, you're losing talent within organizations. Or perhaps those employees are stepping down to lower positions. Perhaps those employees are taking extended time off. Perhaps they're absent every other day because they're caring for their loved one. And so the workplace is silently suffering, but they probably are not thinking about, why is this happening? Have we done the research to determine who are these individuals who are making this decision? And is there anything that we can do about it to support them so at the end of the day, they remain with us? So that we're not spending an absorbent amount of funds to either rehire, retrain, and then that simply goes out the door. Because as we know, there's millions of caregivers in the workplace, and unless we find a way to support them, they're going to continue to transition out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it affects every aspect of society, right? The person can't go to work. They don't have an income. They can't go to their local grocery store, diners. It's a snowball effect. And, I just appreciate you really, bringing light to that topic. George, let's go back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, and one thing that I do also appreciate in the caregiver advocate that you pointed out is not only are you a caregiver or were, but you want to help others, and that's really why many of us still advocate today. Wish we could bring back, our loved ones, but we can't. So we hope that their memory lives on forever through our work. But maybe you could share a few of the literal strategy, or leading through the caregiving lens, some of the tips that our viewers also can sit back, also learn, but also implement in their own lives as they're going through their caregiving journey.
Sure. One of the things that I share is I began to think of caregiving as a project in a simple way. So we have a project, meaning we identify a goal, we identify the components. So when we're managing care, we're actually managing a project. We're managing the life of someone else. Hopefully we're able to co-manage that life with them, but we're sometimes, most of the time, we're in the driver's seat. So how do we organize that? What systems do we create? Is it that I create a binder, and in that binder I divide it among sections about medical, financial, nutrition, just whatever the aspects are having with that loved one? How do I divide that binder, if that's what I'm going to use, into these spaces so that I can have the documents that I need to support them? I can have a space to write questions. So when I'm interacting with the physicians, I can be intentional and clear about each of those visits. The other space is, how do I become a decision maker, right? We make decisions every single day, but when we're placed in a position where we have to make a decision for someone else, we begin to doubt ourselves. Our confidence decreases. And oftentimes, if we make a decision and something goes awry, we hold that and we blame ourselves for it. And so project managing, decision making, confidence, being able to sit in front of a professional and say, can you please slow down and explain that to me so that I can fully understand? If a response is given and it is not in alignment with you or your care recipient's belief, being able to push back and say, thank you for sharing that. However, I need us to consider whatever the aspects are. So I look at all of those things as being leadership skills: decision making, project managing, having the confidence. We do it naturally in our personal lives. But again, when we're responsible for taking care of another adult, it shifts. And we often try to take the step back because we're not confident in knowing that we have the skill set already. And in talking to many caregivers, when I mention you're a leader, they'll look at me like, what are you talking about, Pearl? I'm like, you actually are. You're doing these things each and every day without even realizing it. And so I try to help them see themselves in that position because it really builds their confidence. And it also allows them to continue to develop skills and enhance some skill sets that they are using. So whether they use those skill sets in the workplace if they're there, or they can perhaps use those skill sets when their caregiving journey ends and they transition to something else. So that's why I always think about that as a leadership space, and probably selfishly because it's something that I've just done naturally all my life, is try to support and lead people and really empower other individuals to own whatever space that they're in and to grow from it.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the advocacy you're doing, and I really am confident those tips will help so many out there listening, and I hope our viewers will also continue to reach out to you as well, and through this show, really help them through their journey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pearl, just, as we close here, I wanted to follow up with one last question. But before that, we're going to have all of your contact information and details in the show notes as well as up on the screen. But for those that are listening now and might not be able to watch, where would you like them to go to learn more about you and the work you're doing?
They can go to Aging Care Navigators, and that's a space where they can find clarity, resources, and it's agingcarenavigators.org.
Okay, great. As we close, I just want to ask, I think a very pertinent question because we're all in this together and we all continue to advocate and, try to help support these family caregivers who, quite frankly, they don't know what they don't know, right? But why does caregiver support need to start before the crisis happens?
Oh, this is a tough one. Caregiving's journey, of course, we know it starts when there's a crisis. Then we go into panic mode. Then we go into sometimes confusion. Sometimes we just stop because we don't know what else to do. And so my thought is, let's begin to have the conversations early so that we can plan, so that it can alleviate some of the stress. One of the things that I know when I talk to many family caregivers, they say, I just didn't know. I've never had the conversation with my parent about their finances. I've never had the conversations about their wishes. And without any judgment, we didn't, but let's begin to do that. Let's begin to make the difficult conversation more comfortable so that we are gathering this information for our loved ones. But what it also is doing is preparing you as the adult for your life. So as you're supporting your loved one and gathering this information, who's going to coordinate care for you? What is it that you want your life to look like at this stage? What are your wishes for yourself, right? Gaining that information from our parents begin to put us in a mindset we need to do this planning for ourselves. So hopefully it begins to prepare the next generation of caregivers and put them in a position. I recall even when my mom passed away in 2021, she would always sit at my table and she had her notebook, the black and white composition book. She's an educator. She would sit and she would write in there. And for a long time, I had no idea what she was writing. Until finally one day I said, Mommy, what are you doing? She was actually starting to write her life sketch. And it was such a beautiful gift because it was here in my house. I never paid any attention to it. But actually, when she transitioned and I located that document, my sister and I, we just was so appreciative that she actually wrote this entire life sketch. Everything that she wanted was there for us. So it gave us an opportunity to simply plan and acknowledge what it is that she wanted. So I think about that space the same with caregiving. If we can begin to plan and have things in place for our loved ones with them while they're able to participate, then it puts their life in such a beautiful space that we can honor what their wishes are instead of us sometimes making decisions on their behalf that may be against what they actually wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We recommend the families all the time have that conversation when there isn't a crisis because you don't want to have to make it or have it made for you when there is a crisis. So Dr. Pearl L. Harmon, thank you so much for what you're doing. And we encourage everybody to go to agingcarenavigators.org to learn more and to find some great resources and information. And we look forward to talking to you again in the future.
All right. Thank you all for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you for joining us again here at the Care Advocates, where we're advocating for you. We look forward to seeing you again here next month.